Magic Rings and Laser Beams is a Grimax Studio production created by sci-fi and fantasy fans for sci-fi and fantasy fans. Your host is Ben Sherman, a scriptwriter and voice talent for Fare and History, a longtime gamer and reader, and has been writing fantasy literature for the past 10 years. He's also known by his very silly username, Poohead189. In this podcast, he interviews popular authors of the science fiction and fantasy genres and speaks on writing, gaming, and movies. You can support this podcast by going to patreon.com/poohead189. Welcome, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome everyone. I wish I had more to talk about today, but I'm only going to do a very short intro before we get into our interview, which is actually a somewhat short interview as well. And I want to start off by saying that the audio is not the best, and partially it's my fault because David Drake is very new to interviews on the computer, and I should have specified that having a mic would very much increase the audio quality, but as long as you can understand him, it should be good because, you know, he's fucking David Drake, and all the questions that people have asked me and all the questions that I had for him are answered. So, it should still be good. As long as you understand him, it should be good. But let's talk a little bit about news. Of course, there's new stuff going with Blizzard and BlizzCon. I won't really talk about the World of Warcraft stuff because, honestly, I haven't really liked Warcraft lore in about 10 years. Or at least the Warcraft lore they've come out with the last 10 years. So, I'll go with Diablo 4, which I'm very excited about. Although, there are two problems with it. One, I kind of don't want to support Blizzard of the Hong Kong thing. And two, they said that they're going to start, what was it? They were going to start promoting it near the end of next year, which means that it's not even finished yet. So that means that it shouldn't be out until 2021 or 2022, which of course sounds like a long way away, but it's really not because, it is a long way away compared to them just announcing it, because that's still 2 years in the future. If not, it might even be longer, because Blizzard takes a while. Blizzard's like Rockstar. They make really high quality games, but they take 4 to 5 years to bring them out. They've probably been working on this for a year or two. They're probably going to need to work on it for another year or two before it's going to be out. But that gives people who haven't played Diablo 3 to catch up. Anyway, let's talk about Disney Plus a little bit. Today, although this might air tomorrow or the next day, but today, on November the 12th, Disney Plus just began, and it has all the old Disney shows on it. Honestly, there's some great stuff on there, like Gargoyles, which I absolutely loved, which was surprisingly dark for a kid's show. But the main thing that people are talking about is The Mandalorian, which I'm very excited to watch. Mostly because, one, I love Mandalorians. Probably my favorite people in Star Wars. Two, it says very Clint Eastwood-like, and I'm a huge Clint Eastwood fan. And three, it's got one of my favorite comedians in it, Bill Burr, which is going to be fun to see. He's an extra in it in a few episodes, I think. Although it's the same thing as Blizzard. I really don't want to give Disney a lot of my money, so I'm probably gonna wait until The Mandalorian is fully released, like all the episodes of the first season. Then I'll get it for a week, binge watch it, and then take it away from my, unsubscribe, and I'll probably resubscribe again when the Obi-Wan show comes out. And I'm excited for that because Qui-Gon should be in that one. Or at least there's been talks of Liam Neeson reprising his role as Qui-Gon. And I would assume he'd be a Force ghost. And that would be really neat. I really wish they had him in Episode 3 in a cameo as a Force ghost. But they kind of disappointed me on that. I remember waiting in theaters in 2005. And they just... they didn't do it. I hated that. But yeah. So yeah, not too much to really talk about. But hey, Red Dead 2 is coming to PC, or it's out on PC in certain places, but it's not out on Steam yet. So it's not really connected very well yet. But other than that, yeah, everything seems to be good. Almost forgot to mention, I just published a short story, and it is available on Amazon, and I will leave a link in the description below if you want to check that out. I'm pretty proud of it. I wrote it years ago, but I just edited it and just sort of remastered it a little bit and made sure it was up to standard for publishing, and fixed a few little things. And then when I read it again, I was like, I really love this. I'm gonna go ahead and publish it, and so I did. It's indie published, but my next novella is going to be published by, I think, Grinning Skull Studios. No, or Grinning Skull Publisher. I don't know why I said studios. Which is mostly for dark fantasy and horror, which is what this is going to be. And it's going to be called Blackwood Baronies, and I'm nearly done with it. And then after that, I have a novel that I'm going to have published that is exclusively about dwarves. It's going to be like The Hobbit, except without a hobbit, if you know what I mean. It might have a few other races in it, but like there will be no halfling character that I'm planning on. It'll be about dwarves, about going to reclaim a lost hold, which in my universe is called a Thundrim, and I'm gonna write it as if I'm a scholar that's pieced together a lot of primary and secondary sources about the race, and it's going to be called the Book of Druzkul, which I'm really excited about. I've already written some of it, or just started, but yeah, I'm really excited about all this stuff. But that's enough about me. Let's get to the interview with David Drake. Thanks, guys. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special interview I've been waiting to do for months now. Most of the authors I've spoken to have been primarily fantasy authors, and I know that you've written some fantasy as well, but I wanted a mainly science fiction author, and it's my great pleasure to speak to David Drake. If you could introduce yourself to people who aren't familiar with your work.
I certainly have written a lot of... I started out writing horror, as a matter of fact. Mm-hmm. That was a long time ago. But I have certainly written a lot of fantasy. But I am best known for military science fiction. Not what I write mostly, but it's the thing that made an impact. So, does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. Now, I've been familiar with Hammer Slammers for a while, but I only recently got into your other work a few months ago so I could interview you, and if I'm correct, you wrote Hammer Slammers back in the 70s.
Yeah, the stories were written in the 70s. The book came out in 79, first volume. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's correct. And as I say, I've written a lot of other things, and I had written a lot of other things. But that's what put me on the map, the Hammer Slammer stories.
Okay. I know it's, as you said, it's what you're best known for, apparently. Is it your favorite work you've written? And if not, what is?
Probably not. I was doing good work then, but I was very new to the business. I guess what I like as much as anything are I've written a lot of short stories that I really have an affection for. I started out writing short stories for magazines and one-shot anthologies. And some of those are probably my favorite work, but they weren't what made my name. The Hammer stuff started out as short stories, as a matter of fact.
Right.
Hammer Slammers is a collection.
I know you said you had a lot of fun writing RCN, quite a bit.
Yes.
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 I was curious on why you enjoyed writing, or at least for your military novels, why you enjoyed writing military science fiction rather than just military fiction, and why you choose like fusion-powered hovercraft Panzers rather than like M48 Pattons or M113s. You just a science fiction fan?
Well, I was drafted into Vietnam, and I served with the 11th Armored Cavalry.
Yes.
In Vietnam and Cambodia. And basically, when I started writing, there wasn't much of a market for historical fantasy, sword and sorcery, which is what I was trying to write. But I thought, well, I can write science fiction. And, military SF has been around for a very long time.
Yes.
But I just been there. And so I used basically a real background. And the stories took off. It wasn't that I was so enamored of writing them, but I could sell them. I was really desperate in the 70s to sell anything.
Right.
So, I was glad that happened. And it made a name for me because other people weren't doing what I was doing. I wasn't the first person writing modern military SF. That would probably be Joe Haldeman. Who was an infantry grunt a little earlier than I was over there in a tank. And Jerry Purnell was also writing in the early 70s, military SF.
Okay.
So I didn't start it, but I was certainly a major factor in the beginning of military SF, modern military SF.
All right. And I think I've heard before that you added a lot of the aspects to the tanks in Hammer Slammers based on what you wish you had in Vietnam.
Yeah, basically. Basically I'd been there, and having something that doesn't have treads was really very positive to anybody who's watched a track being changed in the field. Miserable job, absolutely miserable. If you're running through mud, mud is basically fine ground rock. That's what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And if you've got your running gear rotating constantly in what amounts to a jewel polishing compound, it wears your track pins and tracks pretty fast. And it's a terrible, terrible job to change them. It's okay if you're just going in a straight line, but if you have to turn, you tend to throw tracks. And then you got to put them back on, and that's a miserable job. So, I was taking real world problems and applying a science fiction response to them.
Okay.
But the problems are real.
Yes. I've read quite a bit of your essays, and you did say you were proud to serve with the 11th Cavalry, but it was a notably bad experience overall.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was terrible. Vietnam was an extremely stupid war.
Yes.
At all levels. I was drafted out of law school. Mr. McNamara canceled the graduate student draft deferment in 1968. So, not just me, but the time I went in, about a third of the people in my basic training battalion were college graduates. That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
We were whipped out of grad school and turned in whatever they chose to turn us into, which was mostly grunts. I got into a Vietnamese language school. I knew where I was going when I got out, but I was pretty sure of that anyway.
Right.
And this way I got assigned to something other than an infantry unit. I got assigned to an armored cavalry unit. So I got to ride a tank in Cambodia instead of pumping through rice paddies. It was an impressive event, but it was quite awful. And I am proud of the Black Horse.
Yes.
And I'm proud of having served. But, this was a really bad idea for the country. And for me personally, it pretty much shattered the person I'd been. And I came back in 1971, just trying to put my life back together. Went immediately back to law school. I don't have any recollection of what happened my last 3 semesters in law school, but I graduated. The main thing I thought of when I got up each morning was they're not going to shoot at me today, and they didn't. So I have recreated myself from the rubble of what I'd been before they smashed me. Mm-hmm. So I'm not very pleased about this, but it gave me a career.
Right. And I was wondering, to reiterate on how it was a, I guess, traumatic experience. Is that why did you write the Hammer Slammers initially after you came back? Because it was what you knew, or?
Well, yes. I had an in because I actually knew about this stuff. Mm-hmm. But I wrote it for myself as a way of getting my head straight.
Okay.
I was really pretty messed up, which I regret, but I was. And so I was writing to settle my own head, and seems to I never did make sense of it. I came to the conclusion that, well, actually, this doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And, but I was able to keep it between the ditches. I came back very, very angry. Angry at everything. Mostly, I suppose, angry at myself, because I'm proud of the unit. I'm not proud of what I was doing. The world is a worse place for our being there, and that certainly includes me being there. And, I just had to get my head straight. And I tried.
Mm-hmm.
So, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. Already to answer. You can still hear me.
We could take a moment.
I'm here again.
Okay. Now I'll give you one last Hammer Slammers question before we go to RCN. Do you have any more Hammer Slammers novels planned at all? Do you want to write any more of them?
I didn't actually plan the most recent short story.
Mm-hmm.
When a friend of mine put together Onward Drake, he told me he wanted me to write a Hammer story. So I did. So that's the most recent thing I've written. Save What You Can. It's in Onward Drake. It's a good story,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't really need to put my head back in that place. And
Right.
I could do it again if I had some reason to, but I'm not doing it for my own reasons.
You weren't doing it for yourself like you did back in the 70s.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm not saying I'm a perfectly balanced human being, because I'm not. But, I'm basically in better shape. And I'm no longer actively afraid of what I'll do if somebody gets in my face in the wrong place.
Mm-hmm.
I was really very angry. And I now just trying to live a very quiet life and have no desire to get back into the Hammer Slammers mindset. I'm capable of it.
Right.
And so, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And for your RCN books, you said you wanted it to essentially be a story of 18th century Royal Navy in space, or at least with all the ranks and a lot of the feel. What prompted you to want to use the 18th century rankings and style? Like, why not the Indian Mutiny or the Napoleonic era, or various stuff like that?
Well, basically, the Hornblower series had been favorite stories when I was younger.
Okay.
And similar things. And I was chatting with Jim Bain, who's my friend as well as my publisher. And he was a huge fan of Patrick O'Brien's Aubrey Maturin stories.
Yes.
And he got me into reading them. And in chatting with Jim, it struck me that there have been an awful lot of Hornblower knockoffs. Some of them very, very good. But there hadn't been anybody who'd really done the Aubrey Maturin stories. And I said to Jim, I'll bet I could do that. And he said, my deal with Bain Books is I write stories when I'm ready to write them, and they have open contracts. And Jim was actually a close friend. I'm on friendly terms with Tony, but it's not the same sort of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But, basically, I was supposed to write a novella for Dave Weber for his Honor Harrington series.
Right.
That's one of the Hornblower knockoffs. I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote a novella, but I used it to see how easily I could do a buddy story in that milieu. And that was that was a long enough chunk to give it a fair test. It was 20-odd thousand words. And it worked out pretty well. So I took that experience and then sat down to write stories of that type myself, not using the same characters that I had for the story for Dave Weber,
Right.
but the same sort of situation. And actually preceded first Aubrey Maturin book, and used that as really the model for what I was doing, and did. And they took off, I'm delighted to say. But what I was able to do with them, I've written a lot of military SF,
Mm-hmm.
and it tends to be pretty grim because, well, frankly, Vietnam was pretty damn grim.
Yes.
Cambodia didn't get better. So, I came back and I was writing good stories. I mean, the Hammer stuff is good stuff, but it's really pretty grim. And I'd always wanted to write adventure stories, genuine adventure, and did so with the RCN series. That's the sort of thing I wanted to write from the beginning before I got so smashed up in Nam.
Okay.
And stuff was just coming out sour. That's what it amounts to. And, the RCN series just let me tell fun stories. They're adventure.
Right.
And God knows they're not gentle. But it's a whole different thing from what I was doing with the military SF. So,
How far, when you began RCN, how far did you plan on the story? Because I know you probably didn't plan like 8 books ahead or something, but obviously Daniel Leary and is it Adele? Is that how you say it?
Adele Mundy,
Okay.
yeah.
Obviously they're not working together at the beginning of the first novel, and were you planning on her being the intelligence officer for him before you began it, and various things like that, like Hogg and everyone would be a part of the crew, or did you kind of just start writing and just let it go and see where it would go?
I plotted a story and then I wrote it.
Okay.
But I plotted a story.
Okay.
And then when I wanted to write another one, I plotted another story. This was not, I'm going to do a 9-book set,
right,
or anything like that. I think there are probably more than 9 at this point. Mm-hmm. But that was not, I write stories. I'm not trying to write future history or anything like that. I just want to do the best job I can on the whatever I'm working on.
Okay.
And that's true for a short story, it's true for a novel.
All right. What prompted you to switch to first-person narration in the most recent RCN book?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wanted to shake things up with the one where I changed to that. I'm blocking on the name, whichever one it was. where I did that 2 books ago. I wanted to shake things up. I had a new character. So I was chatting with a friend, and I mentioned, if I did this first person, that'd be an even bigger change. Let's see if I can do it. I've done very few things first person beforehand, but I had done other things. And so I did it. Literally just trying to make it all different in my head, not for the reader, but so that I keep excited about what I'm doing.
Okay.
It's for me.
Right. Will there be more Daniel Leary stories, or is he too successful to make for an interesting protagonist, do you think?
I've got age. Daniel's gotten senior enough, and I tend to focus on the microcosm. And I'm not somebody to do, huge overarching plots with, we are going to save the universe. That's right. Not me.
Okay. You want to follow the grunts?
Yeah. Yeah, basically. It's what I was.
Yeah.
And, that's basically how I view things. So I've got a younger protagonist in, and, the existing characters, I'll continue using them, but they are less likely to be central than they would have been when I was first writing the series.
Okay.
So,
will you be returning to Roy and Harry Harper for future stories, or will you be adding more viewpoint characters to the RCN universe?
Well, the most recent one I did was completely different.
Okay.
Totally different. Didn't have any of the same characters. And that worked out okay, but I think it sort of pissed people off. I mean, I wrote a good book, but it wasn't what people were expecting, especially since it was being billed as this is the 14th in the series.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but it isn't like the previous 13, especially not like the first 12. So I might well do another Royal Featry book. I'm sort of planning one, as a matter of fact. But the next thing I'm going to do is a completely different set of things. A series based on Mallory,
Okay.
The Matter of Britain, King Arthur and his Knights. And I've done 2 of those already. I'm working on the plot for a 3rd. So that's the current plan.
Okay. When you first began the RCN books, did you sort of plan it to be or at least for the first book, did you have it as Daniel Leary was going to be the sort of charismatic Aubrey figure, and then Adele would be sort of the straight man kind of... Well, I recall, even her humor is very much like that, because I recall, I think when, I don't remember which book this was, but I remember that she walked up and turned on the help feature on a spaceship when it was about to explode, because she's so, yeah.
She's not a naval officer, except by courtesy. She knows nothing about it, but she was there. And she tried. Yeah, I have written a fair amount of humor over the years. It's not what I'm best known for.
Okay. Now, I'm a large fan of fantasy, and so I wanted to ask you about your Lords of the Isles books a bit, if you would.
Sure. Sure.
In the books, we see clothing and technology from the Renaissance, but they're traveling across the inner sea in triremes, and people still use bronze armor. I'm curious on why you wanted to blend such technologies together from various eras.
Don't know that I can really give you an answer to that. Basically,
just interesting.
I always started out with the idea of writing a story.
Mm-hmm.
And see, I came up with magazine fiction, and each story had to be self-standing because I couldn't assume that anyone was going to read the previous things, and carried over. And so I've always viewed each series, each story, as unique, to itself. I didn't consciously create the world of the Isles with anything in particular in mind.
Okay.
And I know a fair amount about ancient history.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Throughout the series, we see references to things like the city of Carcosa and the former kingdom's capital in the books, and inscrutable cosmic entities. Are these considered nods to H.P. Lovecraft for your own roots in writing horror early on?
No. Actually, I was a partner in the publishing house Carcosa.
Okay.
And so I was playing games, yes, and the mention of the King in Yellow, for that matter, which was a favorite story of Lovecraft's. But the Carcosa actually comes from Ambrose Bierce. That's where it started. And Lovecraft was a fan of Bierce and certainly of Robert W. Chambers. But, and I was playing off those earlier works, but, I was writing a very different thing. And I am a big Lovecraft fan, and a even bigger Clark Ashton Smith fan, but I'm not doing the things they were doing. So.
Okay. Now, I had someone ask me if I can include this question. It's said that some writers' own personality and identity go into their work, whether intentional or not. Do you think so? And of all the characters, which would you say reflects you the most, and why?
Well, that's a fair question. I would say Ilna in the Isles series, okay. Mundy in the RCN series. They're both women.
Mm-hmm.
Go figure.
Let's see. The character Garrick is in many ways a different take on the lost royal heir, yet he gets around his lack of experience in war and combat training by the ghostly mental presence of his long dead ancestor. Was this subversion of the trope intentional, or did you kind of just develop it as you created the world? Although you did say that you just made stories, so you didn't create the world beforehand. But
I wasn't. I've always found the notion of using the hero's journey and that sort of thing. It's always struck me as sort of bullshit. I don't think in those terms. But I wasn't trying to subvert anything. I was just trying to tell a good story.
Okay. Which book of the series would you say was the most challenging to create?
Ooh, fair question. I suppose Servant of the Dragon.
Why is that?
Well, it was far and away the biggest. The central character isn't one, the Sharina wasn't really someone I identified with, but worked out pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I guess that was probably the most challenging.
Okay. Are there any? Well, I guess you've answered it before. Are there any new works that you've planned coming down the pipeline? I guess you can't really tell us the names of anything, but you said that there was new.
Well, I've done 2 and plotting a 3rd
Mm-hmm.
In the new series. The Spark, the Storm, and now the one I'm working on doesn't have a real title yet, but I'm tending toward the Serpent since I seem to be doing S titles
Right.
on this series. I'm working.
What is?
Best I can.
Do you know what the? I mean, obviously you would if you could, but you can't really say what the series is called yet, or if it's fantasy or science fiction or.
Oh, well, that's actually my publisher called me about that.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna do the cover. So is this science fiction or fantasy? And I said, technically, I suppose it's science fiction, but it has the feel of fantasy and should have a fantasy cover, I think. So the cover for the Spark, which is extremely good, has sort of a fantasy feel to it. And that's also true of the second book in the series, Storm. So I think thinking of it as fantasy is the most useful technique, but technically I don't think it is.
Oh. Okay.
I'm being as honest as I can.
Right. It's sort of a science fiction world with a lot of fantastical elements, I suppose.
That's sort of what it amounts to. It's a version of Dark Age Europe, in which the collapse that creates it is not the fall of the Roman Empire, but rather a more general collapse than that. You have an ancient past and artifacts from the ancient past which can be modified and used in the present day. But it really doesn't. The closest thing I've written to it is the Northworld series,
Mm-hmm.
which I was using the Norse sagas, and that's the same sort of mix of fantasy and science fiction, but it's different in that those are pretty grim. I mean, they were grim even by my standards, which is saying something. Was saying something at the time. I think I was getting my head up from Nam. Finally,
Mm-hmm.
took a while. So basically, the new series Time of Heroes is what Tony's calling it. And that's basically accurate, but I don't know how descriptive it is. But if you can think of it as basically Thomas Mallory in a sort of a science fiction setting. You have heroes.
Right. Okay. I heard that you were commissioned to write for The Hunter Returns, and they had you kill a bunch of people in the story?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was sort of funny. Jim Bain, as I say, we're friends. One of his favorite books as a kid was Fire Hunter by Jim Kelgard.
Mm-hmm.
I'd read a great deal of Kelgard. I didn't happen to have read Fire Hunter. But he asked me if I'd do a continuation of it because he just got the rights to republish it. But it was only 25,000 words. Well, it was only 40,000 words long. And he couldn't publish it at the time with less than 65,000. So would I do another 25,000 words to bulk out Fire Hunter so he could reprint it?
Mm-hmm.
And then this is basically a favor for Jim. I don't mean it was a hard one for me to do around Pleasant, but
right.
This wasn't my idea. And Jim had the idea that in Fire Hunter, you have this kid who has been kicked out of his tribe. He's Paleolithic hunter-gatherer. Hunter,
right.
In his case. And you have him going off on his own and not only surviving, but inventing most of the great inventions of the Stone Age.
Huh.
And then at the end, he's sitting in a comfortable place, and the shattered remnants of the tribe that kicked him out come shambling up to him and beg to be taken in, since, he's doing pretty well now.
Right.
And he takes them in. Well, the problem was, Jim thought, well, I could just do chapters from the tribe's viewpoint to do interstitially with the chapters from Hawk's, named Hawk,
right.
viewpoint. So, okay, it seemed simple enough. And it wasn't exactly hard. The problem was the tribe has about 40 people in it when they kick Hawk out. And at the end, there's 7 of them. And they're in miserable shape. So I basically had 25,000 words in which to kill 33 people. And what was really difficult was Kelgard had gotten all the good animals.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to find less significant animals, horses and camels, for example, with which to kill people. And I'm a professional. I did the job. And I sent it off to Jim, sent my 25,000 words. He called back when he got it. Got my wife. And he wanted to know if I was doing all right, because I just sent him something and it seemed really, really depressing, and he wanted to know, was I okay? And she explained that as she understood, and understand this was Jim's idea.
Yeah.
That I intended to have my chapters stuck between Kelgard's chapters.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, Jim said, "Oh, don't tell him I called." She did, of course. He was kind of embarrassed when he realized what he'd done. But I'll tell you, it's not as easy as you would think to kill 33 people in vivid, strikingly memorable fashions, which was my job in 25,000 words.
Did you, I think you used, like, the ancestor of the sloth, maybe to...
Oh,
I can't recall.
I don't think a giant sloth kills anybody, but I did have the giant beaver of death.
Yes, yeah, okay, that was...
And the marmot of doom. Those are my working titles for the chapters. Yeah, I don't think I used... one of the problems with all this was that Kelgard was basically setting it in North America, but he has one scene that involves a woolly rhinoceros.
Oh.
And they didn't cross the Bering Straits.
Yeah.
So one of my problems is just where the hell am I going to set this? Because, Kelgard uses both Europe and North America.
Mm-hmm.
So I wound up mostly using North America, but I don't think I used a sloth. I did use a giant beaver.
Okay.
Giant grass-eating beaver.
I just recalled that and I had to ask, even though, but, let's see. I also want to know, since you are really interested in ancient world history, which is something I geek on all the time, you learned Latin?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
I don't have enough Greek to mention, but my Latin was pretty good. And I do read Latin for fun.
Okay. Did you... why would you want to learn Latin instead of, say, Old English or Greek or Old Norse?
Well, my high school had Latin and Spanish as the available foreign languages.
Right.
And I took Latin. And then when I got off to Iowa for my undergraduate studies, I was actually learning German because I was going for a chemistry degree. But I didn't dislike German. I was doing okay. But I was feeling very lost and alone in a big university, coming from, moderate-sized town. And I thought about it and realized that one thing I could do that would feel homey, so to speak, would be to get back into Latin. So I did, and did it with more enthusiasm than I ever had in high school. It wasn't because I especially liked Latin, but I wanted it to ground me, and I got into it sort of a big way. Never had any desire to read Old English. And believe me, they did not offer that at Clinton High School.
Right, yeah. Okay. Have you... I doubt anything would have ever been published by that, but have you ever written anything in Latin? As in, like, you ever felt the need to write a story in it?
I've translated some and put it on my website.
Okay.
There's quite a lot of Ovid's lyrics up on my website. But no, I've never had any desire to write anything. God knows.
Okay.
All right. I'm an English speaker.
You're right. Okay, let's see. Give me one moment.
Repeat that, please.
Oh, I was just saying, give me one moment. So you're fine.
Okay.
Let's see here.
Been drinking a great deal of tea today.
Okay. Also, before we continue, did you have a good trip when you were in Italy?
It was interesting. It was very stressful, but saw some amazing things. We were in Tuscany, and so I've seen some very impressive art and a great deal of Tuscan countryside because we were lost much of the time. But, I saw countryside. And it is, I probably needed the break. I don't like breaks, but I think I need them more often than I take them.
Right. Okay.
And, so we went with another couple that we've known for 40 odd years and traveled well together. And so we went to Tuscany.
Okay. Now I only have a few more questions.
Okay.
Do you prefer, let's see, I know you've written quite a lot of novels, but you've also written a fair amount of short stories, as you said. Do you prefer writing longer or shorter stories, generally?
Probably, I started with short stories. That would probably be my choice if I could make a living doing it. I like writing short stories, and I'm good at it because I actually started out writing them at a time everybody wrote short stories. That was how to have a career, was to write short stories. That hasn't been true for a very long time. And nowadays, a professional writer may never have occasion to write a short story. I do it mostly for fun when somebody asks me. I just did a fairy tale for Tony, the main publisher, Tony Weisskopf.
Yeah.
Got the idea of doing a tribute anthology for Tim Bolgio, the LibertyCon organizer who recently died. Really nice guy. And she asked if I would do a short story for a tribute anthology. And sure. And I just did it gratis. The amount of money that I'd have gotten for it was not enough to matter one way or t'other. But, Tim was a really good guy.
Yeah.
So I prefer short stories, but I write novels.
I've heard before that some people might consider the RCN books the Hammer Slammers books and the RCN series connected in the same universe, maybe in the future. No? Okay.
No.
All right, so you wanted to do standalone sort of series. Okay.
It's more than that. The RCN series are adventure science fiction, space opera. The Hammer Slammers are military SF and have a totally different feel.
Yeah.
Same guy wrote them, but just a totally different feel.
Okay. Actually, I think that's all the questions I have for you today.
Okay, have I answered them adequately?
Yes, you did. You did very well. Thank you so much.
Like I say, it's not hard to speak, and I always tell the truth to the best of my ability, whether I'm writing or speaking. So I don't guarantee I'm always right, but I try. So, okay, I'm glad we're done with this then.
I appreciate it.
Okay.